heard the shot that hit me. But it was like slow motion where you can kind of see in my shoulder, he shot me right here. He was about 5 feet behind me, and the shot came, and as I fell forward, my arm kind of flew through the air and landed on the ground in front of me. And it knocked all the wind out of my lungs.
Welcome to The Second Act, a monthly video series introducing you to interesting people with inspiring stories. Every guest has a connection to organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation. I'm your host, Brianna DiPilato. Today's guest is Kacey Johnson, Columbine High School shooting survivor, motivational speaker, author, tissue recipient, and mom of 4. This is Kacey's story.
We grew up in Lakewood, and then around my freshman year of high school, we moved to Littleton. My parents had 5 acres and a really big barn. My sister and I loved riding horses, so we had a couple horses out back, and that was a really fun space to grow up and have lots of freedom to play outside. What else? I started a high school at Bear Creek, and after 2 years, I decided to switch over to Columbine. I had a really rough sophomore year at high school, at Bear Creek High School, with some friend situations and suicides, and I just felt like I needed a new start. So we switched over to Columbine, which is where my best friend from the barn went. And so I wanted to be with her more, which is why I picked that school. And before that, I competed in gymnastics and horseback riding. Those were my passions, and really took up all my time competing on my horses.
Did you start to feel comfortable there pretty quickly though, or how was your experience during that first year?
So it's the only year I went there, and yeah, I felt comfortable. I think Lindsay and I, that was my best friend, we rode to school together. We went home to my parents' house for lunch every single day, where we'd hurry, make the 10-minute drive home. My mom would already have lunch laid out for us, and then make the 10-minute drive back to school just in time to get to 5th or 6th period. So yeah, it was comfortable, really big school, lots of people, but it was fine for me.
Bring us back to April 20th, 1999. It's been 22 years. We just, crossed that milestone last month or so, which is just kind of crazy to think about, because I think we've all heard of, the event that happened or the shooting that happened. So if you can bring us back to April 20th.
April 20th, 1999, like you said, 22 years ago, but it seems there are days when I feel like I was just there, and then there's days where it feels like it's been a lifetime ago. But I can always take myself very easily back into that exact situation and what it felt like, and how the day went. I remember absolutely everything from the day. And maybe 1 or 2 minor details that didn't stick in my mind, but most of it's all there. It was a couple days after a big horse show, where I was leading Colorado in several events to get to the World Championships. So I was so excited. I was having a great spring, and went to school that morning, and it was normal like any other Tuesday morning, until the lunch hour when I couldn't find my best friend, Lindsay. At which point I went to our locker that we shared to look for her, didn't find her, went to her math class to see if she was there. And by the time I realized I wasn't going to find Lindsay, I walked in front of the library to go to my car, but then realized it was too late to go home. I wouldn't have time to get home and back. So for the only time, I stepped into the library, picked up a silly gossip magazine, and sat by the window. And as I was sitting there, some kids heard some popping noises outside, so we kind of all looked out the window to see what was happening, but didn't really notice or see anything specific. Until a couple minutes later, a teacher came running into the library, screaming at the top of her lungs that there were boys outside with guns. We needed to get down and hide and get our heads under the tables. And it really took a couple seconds for it to register that this was real. I mean, how can this be happening? But the panic in her voice made it obvious that this was a really serious situation. So we ran, everybody in different directions, hiding under tables, pulling chairs in next to us to try and hide. So about 10 feet in front of me was a long row of computer tables that were kind of sectioned off. And I picked one of the sections and pulled a chair in next to me and thought, I'm pretty small. I've got an awesome hiding spot. There's no way they're going to find me here. And I just started praying while I was under there. It was terrifying. I mean, the guns were getting louder. People were screaming. As soon as they entered the building and were shooting and setting off pipe bombs, the fire alarms started going off. I mean, there was so much going on. And then I knew right when they came into the library, because it just felt like a gut punch of evil came into the room. It was so heavy, so terrifying. They were laughing, pointing people out, shooting. I mean, and not necessarily anybody in particular, just whoever was in their way. And I was kind of just, because I couldn't see anything and I was trying to stay still and hidden, I was using my ears to try and figure out where they were going and how close they were getting to me, when I realized that one of them was about 5 feet behind me. And I turned to look at him, and he was kneeling down, pointing the gun to the boy who was hiding in the section of the table behind me. And that boy didn't have a chair pulled in next to him. And I knew the shooter was going to kill him and then turn the gun on me. I just had a feeling that I would be shot. I knew it was coming. So I turned around and plugged my ears and did my best just to crouch down and protect myself as best I could. And I heard the shot that did kill the boy behind me. And then I heard the shot that hit me. But it was like slow motion, where he was, you can kind of see in my shoulder, he shot me right here. He was about 5 feet behind me, and the shot came, and as I fell forward, my arm kind of flew through the air and landed on the ground in front of me. And it knocked all the wind out of my lungs, to which he told me to quit my complaining, but he used much different language. And I felt like if he saw me still breathing, he would think he needed to shoot me again. So I quit breathing, pretended to be dead, and he moved on to other parts of the library. At which point I looked, when I knew he had gone far enough and couldn't see me, both shooters, I opened my eyes and looked at the damage, and there, I mean, my arm was devastated. My shoulder and my hand, and the bullet had gone straight across my neck. I couldn't move at all. And there was so much bleeding. I was just trying to stop the bleeding and really wondering if I was even going to get out alive. A few minutes after that, everybody in the library got up to leave. I guess the shooters left the library to go down to the cafeteria. And one boy stood up and told us all to get out the back door of the library, but I couldn't move. I couldn't get that chair out beside me because my arm no longer worked. And so I started hollering for help, and that's when a boy came to my rescue, really. He pulled the chair out from beside me, pulled me up to my feet, and we ran. And for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I ran through fields, hid behind police cars, just holding this flailing arm next to my side and trying to stop the bleeding. And probably 20 minutes later, I actually got loaded into an ambulance. But right before the ambulance came, I was laying in this grassy triage area, and an off-duty nurse came to my side, and she was taking care of me, holding pressure on my wounds. And the first thing I asked her was, "Are they going to cut off my arm?" I was still very calm, but I knew it was really bad. And she couldn't tell me no. And I knew she was trying to phrase it in a way as to not scare me. And she very much in a calm nurse way said, "You will be going straight into surgery. They're going to take care of you." But I really thought that there was a chance I would lose my arm as I was being loaded into the ambulance. But I remember in the ER, my parents walking in. And I even remember the doctor saying that my parents were on their way, and feeling so guilty that they were going to walk into this situation and see me like this. Of course, it wasn't my fault, but I did not want my poor parents to have to experience seeing me in such bad condition. So then when they walked in was the first time that I cried. And I asked my dad, "Did you see the hole in my arm, Daddy?" And he said, "I see it. It was big." And right from there, I went into surgery a few hours later, and it was a mission to keep me from becoming an amputee at that point.
Talk us through, I guess, the days and even hours, I guess, that led up to your surgeries and the beginning of the healing of the arm.
So initially, like I said, there was a 4-inch hole in the back of my shoulder. The bones in my shoulder, the top of the humerus, were completely shattered to dust. The x-ray literally looks like a cloud of dust. So there was just no structure left to my arm whatsoever. And I had lost half my blood. So truly the first day was saving my life, getting me blood, and cleaning out the wound. Not that they knew what they were going to do with it yet, but they weren't giving in to amputation quite yet. And then a couple days later, I was in the ICU for about a week. So a couple days later, they put me through another surgery to stabilize, lengthen the arm back out, and clean it out again. This whole time, I mean, I don't know any of this. I'm not feeling well, and I'm under all the medications. But in the meantime, there were doctors across the country talking about what to do. I mean, I was missing so much muscle, so much of the soft tissue, that it was just a little tricky to put in a metal joint. And they didn't want to amputate. They wanted to give me the best opportunity at a normal life as possible. They knew I was competitive with my horseback riding. And then a doctor in Denver came and suggested that they use an allograft. My parents had never heard of such a thing in their life. When Dr. Wilkins came into the room in the ICU, I was not part of this conversation. And he suggested this. I mean, they had heard of organ donation through TV shows, and you hear the big stories, but bone donation was so new to them. None of us knew that that was an option. And he was saying he felt like this was the best opportunity to let me keep my arm and have some amount of function, even if it would never be 100%. It would still be two arms. I could still write eventually. As a side note, my hand was also completely shattered, and they also used allograft bone to put my thumb and wrist back together. So really, these allografts, the donated bones, helped put my whole right side, my dominant side that I write with, back together.
At the time, you probably didn't think much about it being donated bone, but I guess what would you say, not just to the doctors who clearly thought through all the different possibilities to make you have a functional arm again, what would you say to the tissue donor?
So I have thought about that so much, because initially I was not in a mindset to even think about that. I was in complete survival mode, and they saved my arm, and I was put right to work learning how to use it. And I was in the hospital 2 weeks. I left with severe PTSD. I could not even function mentally, emotionally at all. And then I had this devastating injury that I was trying to work through. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't shower myself. For so long, everything was taken away from me. I literally had to learn how to do life again, how to write again, how to get dressed again, how to move my arm again. And so it didn't ever cross my mind. Now, I knew what they told me, how I got the bone. But again, for so long, I was just surviving until I became a nurse. So I became an oncology nurse at one point, and I was using my arm so much, not fully, it was never fully functional, but I was able to work and do most normal things. But in my nursing career, I started thinking more about the donor, because I was dealing with people who would become donors. And then Dr. Wilkins asked me to go give a presentation to the American Association of Tissue Banking in Keystone. And I was not a speaker. I didn't want to speak at all. I didn't like being in front of people, but this man saved my arm. So I said, sure, I'll come. Yep, I'll come talk for you. And so I did it, and I was trembling and shaking, telling my story to 1,000 people. And at the end, somebody asked the question, did the donation save your life? And I was so taken back by that question, because my initial response was, well, no, it wasn't an organ donation. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, but did it save my quality of life, which equals living? Like, I could have been a one-arm amputee at 17, and my life up to that point, when I was on that stage speaking, would have looked so different had I become an amputee. And at the time when I was giving that speech, I had just had our third child, and I thought, I've been able to hold 3 babies at this point, nurse 3 babies, hold the hands of 2 of my girls as we cross the street. That is life. This donation absolutely saved my life and gave me a second chance at living as whole as possible, despite the things that had happened to me. And it was with that one question at a speech that I never wanted to give that completely changed my mindset and made me start thinking about my donor and what a gift that was. And it was shortly after that I reached out to the donor family through Donor Alliance to just let them know how grateful I was, and how through me going to tell my story, her story continues. And what an honor it is for me to do that, to continue the legacy and the story of somebody else through my day-to-day living.